There's so much that I love about college football, but the rivalries are at the very top. So for Notre Dame to go out there and dominate their arch rival, USC, like they did, I'm going to remember that forever. And there's still so much more to talk about from that game, and that's coming up in today's edition of Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. Today is Tuesday, October 17th, and thanks as always for making this your first listen of the day. My name is Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer covering college football for Fox Sports. And this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The everyday listeners know that on Tuesday, I'm joined by my old co-host Luke Smith to go over everything that we liked and disliked about the game on Saturday. And considering Notre Dame's win over USC, there was plenty to like from that one. And as always, Luke was our boots on the ground. He gives us the report from South Bend, from the scene on Saturday. There's so much to cover, so let's get right into it. Let's bring in Luke. All right, Luke, before we get into our three things, I want to go back in time to 6:29 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, just an hour before kickoff. I texted you, how are we feeling? And you replied, honestly, not great. Decent energy in the lots, though. We'll see how it goes. So how was the rest of your night after you sent that text?
Ultimately, it was pretty good, but I'm not going to lie. I think it took me a while to get to enjoy what was going on during the course of that game, just because you know that Caleb Williams is on the other side, and let's be honest, this team's put us through a lot this year, so you're never really sure what's going to happen. But ultimately, it was an awesome night. There's no doubt about that. And any evening that features blitzing / smoking USC and humiliating Caleb Williams in the process can only be viewed as a rousing success.
The disconnect between how Notre Dame fans feel about the team and how casual, or not even casual college football fan, just any sort of college football fan or someone who covers the sport for a living, how they perceive Notre Dame. Those two, they could not have been on further opposites in this one, because I was getting a few texts after the Tyree touchdown, like, that's game. I thought, no way, dude. Like, not even close. And just the fear on the other end that Caleb Williams could get hot was just always present throughout the game. And really, for me, I didn't feel like the game was over and that Notre Dame truly had it until Jadarian Price's kickoff return for a touchdown. And once that happened, I unleashed in the conference room at work. Fortunately, there were not that many people in the room at the time, but I imagine that was the time when you could finally take a deep breath and be like, okay, we got it.
It was after that kickoff, and I'm actually trying to find this text right now because it's funny that you say that. I know that, I think it must have been right after that Tyree touchdown. My uncle texted me saying, does Notre Dame have the ability to blow an 18-point lead? And I said, I'm inclined to believe yes. So after that, he said, all right, well, that's got to be game. And it was. But you're right. I actually had somebody close to me make the observation that you're much louder about the negative things that go on with this team, and you don't take enough time to appreciate the good things that do happen. Probably true. It's just I haven't gotten my mind in that position where I can do that. But after the Jadarian Price kick return, I was ready to kind of, relax a little bit at that point and enjoy it.
So take me through that experience in the crowd, because he broke left, and I was like, oh, wow, he's got a lane for sure. But it looked like USC might have had some guys with an angle to stop him. So as you're watching that play, as it's happening, take me through the roar of the crowd. When did you realize, oh, my God, he's actually going to score this one?
Well, I got to say that I actually thought all game USC was kicking the ball short on kickoffs, and Devin Ford had a couple pretty decent returns. It was clear that they were seeing something there. And I don't know if you noticed this or not, but on that last kick return, they actually replaced Devin Ford with Jordan Faison. So the three guys back there were Faison, Jeremiah Love, and Jadarian Price. And I think this was either Matt Fortuna or Pete Sampson who made this analogy, but basically the idea that it almost seemed like with their kickoffs that you just had, it was like a baseball player who keeps fouling balls off before then
that
finally that was you. Jesus. Anyways, that was a great analogy. Jeez. Wow. This shows you where my head's at today. That was a great analogy, but that I kind of had a feeling that there was going to be something there because I had noticed that. And really, as soon as he cut it back, I'm thinking, oh, okay, he's gone. And then for about a second there, he didn't exactly blow away from the rest of the field. And granted, he had kind of done a lot of running on that play already. But yeah, that stadium just sort of erupted after he finally crossed the goal line. And I think there was also just a sigh of relief when that happened as well, because I would describe that crowd as very engaged, but when I first walked into the stadium, I didn't really get that sense. It wasn't like Ohio State where everybody was ready to go right from the jump. I think people were a little bit apprehensive, didn't know what to expect. And then as soon as Caleb Williams threw that first pick, everybody was like, okay, we can have an impact in this game now.
Yeah, the team needed that pick, and the crowd definitely needed it as well because, look, going into the game, we were not particularly optimistic about it. Coming off that Louisville game, that loss was so bad and just so embarrassing that it's hard to just get up the following week as a fan and just assume the best and be ready to go. But I think for the team now, and hearing some of the players talk and hearing some of the coaches talk after the game, I think that it was perfectly set up for them with USC coming to town, an arch rival playing at home at night on a big stage, because it was enough to get them up and ready to go. Like, hey, man, we can't sulk. We got to prepare hard this week, even though it's the 8th straight game in 8 straight weeks. They were ready to go, and they showed it from the beginning. I mentioned this yesterday, how Marcus Freeman in the pregame interview right before kickoff looked very confident, and he was like, my guys are ready to go. And it's not like he wasn't exuding confidence in previous games, but that felt a little bit different, and considering how poor his body language was during the Louisville game, it was a refreshing change of pace. Notre Dame gets that first pick, the crowd gets into it, and then it really it's all capped off by that Jadarian Price touchdown. And that whole time he was returning that, the only thing I was thinking was, please score so the offense doesn't have to come out on the field, which probably isn't fair because the offense did take care of their opportunities. But it was just one of those games and such a relief in the moment. And honestly, weeks worth of angst just finally got to go away there after that touchdown.
I agree. And something that I think needs to be evaluated is, and people might not like to hear this, but I almost feel like it's a freeing sense that, okay, the college football playoff is off the table. We don't have to walk this razor thin line here that we've been walking the last 2.5, 3 weeks, really since the end of the Ohio State game. And after they lose to Louisville, it's kind of just like, F it, we ball. Like, go out there, basically. You got nothing to lose. And I think that maybe that should have been given some more consideration going into the game, because they played like a team who really were not as tight as they appeared to be at Louisville. They played free, and that showed on the scoreboard, obviously.
We'll be right back with Luke to talk about the things we liked from Notre Dame's win over USC, but I wanted to take this moment to tell you about LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. I used LinkedIn Jobs a couple years ago, and they made it easy to contact the hiring manager, learn more about a role, and eventually I got the job. LinkedIn also makes it incredibly easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs. All you have to do is add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. We all know hiring people can be time-consuming, but adding the right team member can be invaluable to your business, and LinkedIn Jobs makes it easier than ever. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. You know, we'll never find out the real answer here, but I wanted to ask you this because you and I talked about this in the lead up to the game. How much did the Notre Dame players care about the rivalry? Do they feel the same sense of hatred towards USC and specifically their quarterback that the fan base feels? Because it's hard to tell. It's a rivalry game. Maris Leofow did say that we don't like those guys who made that, I think 2 weeks prior to the game, to Tyler Horka from Blue and Gold. But in watching that game, watching how the players reacted, especially on defense, to the domination of USC, I think those guys took a lot of enjoyment in beating up on USC, and particularly Caleb Williams. And you also asked me before, in terms of Notre Dame villains all time, I think Caleb was one going into the game. So to have that moment as a fan, it feels awesome. As a player, especially considering what he did to them last year, that had to feel 100 times better.
It's a great point. I'm sure the players despise that guy. I mean, how can you not, right? And I think you heard even from Sam Hartman kind of just some more acknowledgement of how significant this rivalry was. He pretty introspective post-game press conference talking about really for the first time how he's embraced Notre Dame and vice versa, and how, you know, he's in love with Notre Dame. And now that he beat USC, he feels that he can stand a little bit taller when he goes out and works out before the NFL draft in Southern California. So I think you see that there a little bit too, but yeah, I'm sure the defensive players despise him. And usually I am on board with, I hate when kids being like students go up to players and take pictures of them and all that stuff. I hate it when that kid gave the double birds to the Clemson guy last year. But with Caleb Williams, man, like at the same time, I would not fault Caleb Williams if he swung on that kid. Like I think he would have been within his right to do that, but I don't really feel bad for him in this instance.
Yeah, and if you don't know what Luke is referring to, there's a picture that came out of a Notre Dame student who had rushed the field, it was an unbelievable shot. Whoever the professional photographer was ready for this moment. I think it might have been Michael Reeves. Either way, he gets this unbelievable shot of the student taking a selfie with Caleb and flashing his fingernails, and then that kid posted the video and he came out saying, show me them nails. And I'm with you. I hated the Clemson thing last year, but you know, with this one, I'm willing to turn a blind eye to that, because after what he did last year to Notre Dame, it wasn't just the FND on the fingernails. He dominated Notre Dame. So hats off to him, but he was talking trash while he was doing it. He was taunting them on the way into the end zone, and his arrogant mindset, I'm sure, made its way to the Notre Dame locker room. He even had a comment before the game during like a post-practice presser where he was like, yeah, I'm basically taking on this king persona. It's this thing that I'm carrying into this game. And look, up until Saturday night, he had not really been humbled so far in his college career, and that is actually the first thing that I like about this game before we get into the actual specifics and the outcome and all of that. The fact that this game is going to haunt Caleb Williams for eternity, it does not get better than that. It's not just beating Caleb Williams, though. It's beating your arch rival and the best player on your arch rival's team. Like, this is what makes college football so great. And in a time where there's so much expansion and rivalries, some of them are dying right in front of our eyes, and it's very sad. Like, it makes me appreciate this rivalry even more because, let's be honest, it had been pretty stale for a long time because Notre Dame was doing well, USC was in the dumps, and even though it was still satisfying to beat USC, it's a lot more fun to beat them when they're good. And sure, they might not be a national championship contending team this year, but to beat them when they're undefeated, top 10, reigning Heisman Trophy winner, it is so much sweeter, and I'm so glad to have these kinds of games back in the rivalry between Notre Dame and USC.
It's terrific, and now we can say that he will never have won a game in South Bend, Indiana. And that is just fantastic because I don't think I could have dealt with the alternative. So that's great. I mean, USC has not won a game in South Bend since before I had a driver's permit. So it's been a while. And I'd like it to stay that way.
Yeah, hopefully we could figure out how to get a win in LA because Notre Dame has really struggled whenever they come out west here at the end of the year. Hopefully next year, who knows who the quarterback is going to be for USC, but hopefully Notre Dame could get a win because last year when you and I attended that game, that was not a whole lot of fun.
It was not. And actually, that's one of the things I want to talk about in terms of the first thing I liked is that there was kind of a real sense of redemption from last year's game. If you remember, Cam Hart didn't play in that game last year. Riley Mills and Howard Cross were seemingly just running after Caleb Williams all night. not catching him. Tariq Bracy missed that game with injury. Xavier Watts actually dropped a critical pick in that game too, which I haven't really heard anybody talk about yet. But on this Saturday, Cam Hart continued his incredible season. Mills and Cross really just beat the hell out of Caleb all night. And Bracy's replacement, Thomas Harper, was outstanding too. And of course, Xavier Watts put on what might have been the best single game defensive performance from a Notre Dame player in my lifetime. So there was a real sense of redemption. Like, man, it would have been like the things that were just kind of grasping at straws last year were missing. That all came together on one night.
And it makes you reevaluate last year's game too, because we were getting really frustrated in the crowd because it felt like a lot of USC's wide receivers were running wide open. And I think a lot of fans sort of blamed Al Golden for that. And sure, Al Golden got out coached by Lincoln Riley in that game last year, but Lincoln Riley is also one of the best play callers in all of football at any level. This year, he got his revenge too, and it certainly helps to have all your guys back and healthy. Cam Hart was playing like a guy on a mission. I think Sam Hartman even mentioned that after the Louisville game, Cam was particularly emotional, and I totally get that. He's a fifth-year senior, probably really wanted to play in a college football playoff, and when that was taken away from him, that's got to be really frustrating. But this guy, week in and week out, he's elevating his NFL draft stock, and when he has a performance like that against a USC team who's loaded at wide receiver, that's a great performance by him, and it makes you think that, man, maybe last year if Notre Dame did have their guys, maybe that game goes a little bit differently.
Right, and that was really the second thing that I was going to talk about. When are teams going to stop throwing screens at him? Because 2 weeks in a row, he's caused a fumble on a screen pass, and he also had a very physical tackle on a third down stop on a screen that forced USC into a field goal. He's had a tremendous season, and your friend of the program, Greg Flamong, pointed out in a tweet, really, his last 30 games have been at an elite level of cornerback. Teams are 49 of 108 throwing on him for 550 yards, just 5.1 yards per attempt. He's got 14 passes broken up, 2 interceptions, 3 fumbles forced, and only 3 touchdowns allowed. If his health stands up, his stock's only rising as it pertains to the NFL draft, and I don't know what we really expected from him going into the year. I know that we had heard he had a tremendous fall camp, but you just never really know because he was hurt all last year. And to see him having the year he is, has just been great.
It really has been. Credit to him because not only is he a really great player, by all accounts, great teammate, great leader. There's a reason why he was elected captain. And he's had a very up and down career at Notre Dame. Hell, he was recruited as a wide receiver, changed his positions, and then in 2021 really sort of burst on the scene, and then he starts dealing with all these shoulder injuries, takes a step back. Last year was constantly banged up. So to have a full year, knock on wood, I don't want to jinx it before November, but he's been healthy. He's been playing extremely well. I think that his injury history is going to hurt him a little bit when it comes time for the NFL draft, which is out of his control at this point, but every week, man, he keeps playing well. And going into the year, we all thought Benjamin Morrison was the best cornerback on the team. He still might be, but Cam Hart has certainly played to that level, and it's great to see because Notre Dame's defensive line in front of them also had a terrific game, and it makes it easier on those guys when you have corners like that who can play man coverage. And I wanted to spotlight the Notre Dame defensive line for a little bit because Al Washington was right. In the preseason camp, everyone thought that, and really not even just preseason camp, all offseason long, everyone looked at Notre Dame's defensive line as like the biggest question mark on the entire team. Al Washington even referenced it a little bit in one of his pressers, but he also said that he was very confident in his group, and part of that seemed like coach speak, but they have performed well all season long, and I think Saturday was their best game to date. I mean, we could talk about a bunch of different guys. You already talked about Riley Mills and Howard Cross a little bit. Javonte Jean-Baptiste, his stat line isn't going to blow you away. Only had 2 tackles and half a tackle for loss, but he also registered 6 quarterback hurries. He had a hit on Caleb Williams. He recovered a fumble, and he also forced that first interception. Mills continues to improve. Howard Cross is unblockable there in the interior. And then Nana Osafo-Mensah, probably the best game he's ever had at Notre Dame, and good for him because his amount of snaps had decreased in recent weeks, but then he has an opportunity to make some plays. He did, and it was just an unbelievable performance by that Notre Dame defensive line in particular, and they are the reason why Caleb Williams was held to -8 rushing yards. So just outstanding work by that group and Al Washington for what he's been able to do with these guys all year long.
I'd like to add in Boubacar Traore there too. I mean,
Efficient guy.
it's one of those moments, and this weirdly feels like this has happened with a lot of Notre Dame guys over the year, where you see somebody on the field for the first time and you're kind of like, who is that? And then immediately they make a play. I'm thinking, I mean, honestly, Jadarian Price this year, his first carry is a touchdown. Josh Adams, his freshman year. Dexter Williams coming back from suspension. Just this is selective memory, obviously, but back to Boubacar Traore. I see 51 out there, and he gets that sack. And we all know what happened after with the celebration, but I can't even really be upset with him. I mean, it might have been his first play of his collegiate career, and he comes up with a strip sack. I mean, wow. And also later in the game when he was back in, USC got called for a false start on this down by their goal line, but he was coming again, and I think he was going to get him again. So will be really interesting to see how they use him as a tool. I would imagine that they would try to play him in 3 more games to just so that he stays under that 4-game red shirt. But what a entrance into Notre Dame for him.
And that right tackle had no chance on him.
No.
He went right by him. Didn't even really make a move, just had so much speed and athleticism. I'm really excited to see what he can do as he progresses and as he develops physically, because if he's doing that as a true freshman, look out, because he could be an elite pass rusher here in the years to come. But his celebration, dude, they were off the screen on the broadcast. He was so far up the field.
Yeah.
And I see Caleb Williams, and I saw one of the players, I think it was Maris Leofau, and the fact that a fifth-year senior was celebrating, like, that's inexcusable. Traore, I'll give him that. It's, like you said, one of his first ever collegiate plays. And Jalen Sneed, who just, for the highs are high with Sneed and the lows are extremely low with him. But then I see them coming back on the screen. I'm like, what is going on? And then I see the replay. They are at midfield, dude. Their celebration there was so funny. And look, I get it, heat of the moment, but Marcus Freeman was not happy, and he was laying into Al Washington too. So that's going to be a tough film session for those 3.
Yeah, it almost reminds you of a scene from a movie where, you know, you just kind of have these like dopey, I don't know, heroes that think they saved something from a burning building and they realize it's still on fire and they need to start running. That's kind of the sense I got it. But regardless, a great play from him. Last thing I wanted to touch on, I got to give a big shout out to the stadium DJ. He did some high level trolling of USC throughout the game. Let's just say the ghost of DJ Sticky Boots is long gone and in the past. At some point in the fourth quarter, I think it was after the JD Price kick return, they started playing Party in the USA, and there was emphasis on hopping on the plane at LAX. He just blasted it up, like almost like it's time for you guys to fly back to LA. And then as the game ended, they were playing California Love too, which was just great. They also just played a bunch of Ski during the game, which I thought really hyped up the crowd. And it was a tremendous night from DJ Dash and Co. I also want to give a shout out to the student section there, because I feel like the student section now is way better in terms of like just fan investment and how loud that is than it ever was when we were in school. Like, I kind of didn't even really always like the student section when we were in school, because there were just a bunch of drunk kids who weren't really watching the game, and it was annoying. The student section now is pretty legit, I feel like.
Yeah, did you see that picture from Tyler James during the fourth quarter when you could see how many guys had their shirts off?
I did, and you could see it it looked wild in the stands, like, wow, it's like just pale white in the student section right now.
It's a lot of skin.
And there were these kids in front of me who were probably like between 8 and 13 years old who decided that they were going to do that too, and which was very funny as well. But yeah, great effort from the student section once again.
How cold was it?
It wasn't that cold, but it wasn't warm either. I would say it was probably about 45 degrees. So, you know,
shout out to those guys. And you're right. I was blown away at the Ohio State game, how early the students were there.
Mm-hmm.
And the section was full at the start of the game, which is not normally how it happens, because usually everyone's chugging in the tailgates. They got to get their last few chugs in before they enter the stadium. But they were locked in and ready to go from opening kickoff. And I was like, man, this is a special group. And then you're right. If that's how they're going to act for every game, then Notre Dame is going to have a real home field advantage. And you and I have been critical about the Notre Dame crowd in the past, as have, pretty much every other Notre Dame fan and people who covered the team. But if the students set the tone like that, I think it's a lot easier for everyone else in the crowd to get engaged. So shout out to them. Last thing I liked before we switch over here, I want to give some credit to the offensive line because they had a really big bounce back game. They were heavily criticized after the Louisville game, as they should. Hell, we did it a lot on this podcast, but they really needed a performance like this to get in the good graces of the fan base and really the team and prove that that Louisville game and really the Duke game too they were outliers and that they're much better than how they performed in those games. They created a push throughout the game, especially in the run game. They helped propel Wojciak estimated 95 yards rushing. Again, the stats aren't going to blow you away, but Notre Dame had the ball in short field most of the time. But the most important thing was that Sam Hartman was not sacked one time. I think he was only registered with one hit. I don't even remember it, but that was really impressive. They allowed one single TFL. And going into the game, yes, I know that USC's defense had a bunch of flaws, but they were second in the country in tackles for loss, and they were sixth in the country in sacks. They created a bunch of havoc plays. They really sell out, and Notre Dame's offensive line prevented that all game long, and that's really all you can ask for. They gave Hartman a chance. They gave Estime a chance, and that is why Notre Dame was able to score after all of those turnovers, and they really needed that performance, and I think going into the bye, we'll see a much better performance and a much better unit in this, I can't say second half of the season, in the last 4 games of the season.
Couldn't agree more. It was a really strong performance. Yeah, I know they're charged with one hit. I felt like actually immediately in the postgame, there were no even hurries or pressures attributed to them. So really good performance. They've been great at home. Let's be honest. They haven't a lot of sack at home all year, which is impressive. Now, if that sort of success can be translated to the road, especially when they go down to Clemson in a couple weeks, that's where we're really going to need to see it come through. But good job by them bouncing back.
Before Luke and I switch over to the things we didn't like from the game on Saturday, I want to remind you about our new show here at the Locked On Podcast Network called College Football Kickoff Live, which airs every Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on every Locked On College YouTube channel. College Football Kickoff Live will cover everything going on in the sport and go in-depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of college hosts covering their team every day. This episode of Locked On Irish is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is a skill-based, real money daily fantasy sports game. You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they will do more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. PrizePicks adds a ton of excitement to the sports viewing experience, and you can watch your progress update in real time, win up to 25 times your entry amount, and cash out your winnings with quick scoring, settling, and withdrawals. I've been playing PrizePicks recently, and I have no idea why I waited so long. And what I love most about it is that you aren't competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available instead of battling thousands of other players, including professionals and sharks. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege, code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, there weren't a ton of negatives in this game, but I feel like Notre Dame definitely has a few things they can get better at from this game. There's been a lot of talk about the offense, and look, I get it, but you tell me, what's the first thing you didn't like from this game?
There ultimately weren't that many penalties, but there were a decent amount of penalties early on, and they just felt very untimely. Jalen Sneed running into the kicker comes to mind, and this is just something that's going to be a problem all year. I don't know what it is. They're just not a particularly disciplined team, it seems like, in a lot of instances, and I get playing with an edge and being aggressive, but at this point, we're 2/3 of the way into the season, which is also crazy, but I just don't think this issue is going to rectify itself.
Yeah, it did feel like the penalties that did happen just came at brutal times. Like Benjamin Morrison's pass interference penalty on 1st and 25. That can't happen, especially from one of your better players. And I'm not really sure what happened there with him. I think maybe he mistimed the ball because he was playing great coverage on the play and then just came in and just brought his arm in and just tackled the receiver about a second before the ball even got to him. That was uncharacteristic out of him. But overall, considering what we've seen from this Notre Dame team and the penalties, I will take 5 penalties for 54 yards.
Yeah, you're right. It probably is on the low end of what this team is pulling off on a weekly basis. But I guess just the overarching overarching theme is penalties are going to be a problem.
Yeah, and if you want to include the offsides penalty that never occurred into that, I certainly would get that because that's undisciplined as well from that team. But we've already talked about that. I want to talk about Notre Dame's third down offense. And I alluded to it before. It's bad. It's really terrible. And then when you look up the numbers, it's gross. Okay, so Notre Dame converted 5 of 10 on third downs against Ohio State, which is really good. I thought they did really well against them. Since that game, they went 3 of 15 against Duke, 3 of 13 against Louisville, and now 3 of 10 against USC. Someone let them know that they are allowed to convert more than 3 on third down because that's 23%. And it's awful, and most concerning to me is that is not sustainable. That is exactly how you could allow a team like Pitt or Wake Forest or even Stanford to stay in the game long enough to upset you if drives are getting killed early on. And I think part of that has to do with Notre Dame's execution on second down. They're being put into a lot of third and long situations, which makes it even more difficult because there's not a single wide receiver on that unit other than Chris Tyree for one play a game. Or I guess he had 2 against USC. No one's stepping up. You can't count on them to make plays on third and long. So you have to get into third manageable. That has a lot to do with what Notre Dame does on second down. But going into the bye week, Jared Parker and all of the offensive staff need to get together and figure out third down specifically because the offense has had some problems, but I think that is the most glaring one and the one that could be the most problematic down the road.
It's definitely a problem. And I wanted to be careful about how we talk about the offense because there's been a lot of commentary about they only had 251 yards of offense. And I will concede that at different points throughout the night, the offense was very frustrating. However, when you take advantage of all your short field opportunities, it's hard to be that upset just based on where they got the ball and how they were able to punch it in so efficiently. Even the Benjamin Morrison pick, I mean, that was still a 50-yard drive, so that wasn't exactly like it was a total layup. They were able to score off of that. But you're right, the third down play calling, it just seems to be problematic and perhaps not something, again, that's going to be fixed this year. That's kind of where I'm at. And the other thing I wanted to talk about is that I know Jaden Thomas is hurt. I think he only played 6 snaps, and he is their best receiver. And that's a problem, obviously. But right now, you're just not having any receivers step up that aren't named Tyree or Faison. And when you have Chris Tyree, who's a converted running back, and a kid who came to Notre Dame to play lacrosse as your 2 most, credible receiving targets that aren't Mitchell Evans, that's a problem.
Yeah, and Mitchell Evans showed that defenses can scheme around him.
I think he was hurt too, to be honest.
Yeah, that's true. I'll give him that. But like USC keyed on him, which, there's nothing Evans can do there if they've got a linebacker and a safety over top of him at all times, and they dare the receivers to beat them, and none of the receivers do it. Greathouse actually had the most snaps of any Notre Dame wide receiver with 32. That's a true freshman coming off a hamstring injury that caused him to miss basically a game and a half because he played a little bit against Louisville, but clearly was not healthy. So that's not an ideal situation for the Notre Dame wide receivers. I think the Jaden Thomas injury is a little bit more serious than they're letting on. Hopefully, after the bye week, he's able to come back for Pittsburgh because Notre Dame desperately needs him. They just aren't getting anything on the outside, and we've been harping on it all year long. And frankly, it's really disappointing because I thought after Caleb Smith quit the team in the spring that this was a sign that Notre Dame's receiver room was in a much better place. And then here we are, middle of October, thinking, is there a single wide receiver that could step up beyond Chris Tyree when, credit to him, he's made some great plays, but he's also had 2 critical drops in the past 2 games. There's just no consistency at all from the outside.
I would agree with that. I sound like a broken record here. I think to some extent you just have to accept that these are faults with this team, and that's just going to be the case for the rest of the year.
Okay. Do you have anything more that you didn't like?
Yeah, not really related to the game. I had a problem with South Bend bar covers. Why are we charging $10 to get in the backer or O'Rourke's on Saturday night after the game? Like, what is that? And also, like, if you're going to charge a cover, you're going to have to take card because nobody carries cash in this day and age. And that's just, I don't know, that's just an aside. But as much as I like both those places, it's freaking South Bend, Indiana. And I don't pay covers for bars like anywhere. So I don't understand that move, but that's just something I wanted to throw in there.
A $10 cover at the South Bend bar might as well be $100.
Right.
That's ridiculous. And I know it's a game weekend and they're probably looking at it like easy money, but I'm with you. I can't believe that's a thing. The only cover I ever remember paying in South Bend was just paying the bouncer to get into Feeve when I was like 19 years old.
Right. Yeah, I know. Times are changing.
I know. And not for the better. We used to be a country. Okay, last one. I understand that practically every broadcast crew gets criticized, fair or not. It's this theory I'm working on here where, like, the more people hear from you, if they're not actively choosing to listen to you, they're going to grow to hate you because they remember your mistakes more than your bright spots, and that's just the way it works. Like, people think Joe Buck and Troy Aikman suck, and you might not love their personalities, but to think they suck, I don't get that at all. But this Notre Dame broadcast booth is rough. And I think Jack Collinsworth has a bright future in the industry. He's really young. He's only a couple years older than us. So the fact that he's even in the booth is incredible. And yeah, I know that his dad is, I get it, right? I think he has a bright future. I actually wouldn't even mind him doing like the Peacock game. But for big games like this, you need a big game booth. And frankly, this just isn't it. I don't know if you have watched like the extended highlights or some of the plays that I'm about to reference here, but Jadarian Bryce's kickoff return, that call, it was, I don't even know how to describe it. It's almost like comically bad. Like
it is bad.
The Benjamin Morrison interception, I don't even know if they realized that it was all bad. And I hate to pile on because a lot of Notre Dame fans have been very vocal about their disdain for this group, but I'm kind of coming over to that side now. Given the game and given the fact that it's Notre Dame USC, it was just a rough night for those guys. And I hope that in this weird new NBC deal, we start to get guys like Todd Blackledge in the booth a little bit more, and we'll see what happens. But NBC is going to have to look at this after the year and figure out where they want to go. And yeah, we were spoiled because we had Mike Tirico, who was one of the greatest broadcasters ever, doing the Toledo game and every other Notre Dame home game in the years prior to that. So going from that to this is pretty unfair to the guys in there, but it's rough and it needs to be addressed.
Right. Thankfully, I don't have to listen to this live, but I do catch it on the highlights, and it's rough. I mean, there was also the call last year on the Benjamin Morrison pick six where he basically went Bob the Builder and said, "Can he go? Yes, he can." It's just plays that deserve far more. Hell, honestly, I would love to have Ryan Harris and Paul Burmeister call the games on TV because those radio calls are great. But obviously, I understand that's not exactly how this works.
Yeah, the radio calls are awesome. I love when people dub those calls over the great plays in the game. And Ryan Harris just being so shamelessly pro Notre Dame, like, yes, as he's breaking free. Obviously, you can't do that on TV, on broadcast television, but I do love their excitement. I hope they get a few more opportunities. But, man, I'm looking at this. Really, those are the only things I didn't like. I guess if I was going to add one more, it'd be that I wasn't there to enjoy it. But maybe it's a good thing that I wasn't there. Maybe I'm the jinx because I was at the Ohio State game. We all know how that ended. But I couldn't help but think at the end of that game how the ending of Ohio State would have gone, what that scene would have been like after the game, because it looked unbelievable on TV watching the fans kind of storm the field, whatever you want to call that, and just mob the Notre Dame players, and the team was so happy. But, yeah, I did think about what could have been.
I did too, and I actually voiced that at one point that, wow, I can't imagine what this would have been like if this was Ohio State. And then I was told, can you just be happy for once? And I was like, you know what? You're right. So I'm going to shut up.
Yeah, I agree. We all should enjoy every second of that win because it's going to go down as an all-timer. I don't even think that's a stretch to say. Even though Notre Dame is out of the playoff, to beat USC, to hand Lincoln Riley the second worst loss of his entire coaching career, to ensure that Caleb Williams is not going to win another Heisman, because Notre Dame has basically given the Heisman to a lot of USC players. Carson Palmer, Reggie Bush, Matt Leinart, and Caleb Williams all basically won the Heisman, or at least they solidified their campaign with a dominant performance over Notre Dame. But finally, Notre Dame was on the other end of that and took it away from Caleb Williams, and I'm going to remember that for a long, long time.
Yeah, no further comment there.
All right, that's a good note to end it on. Luke, we'll have you back here soon. Thanks as always.
All right.
All right, that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. I'm sorry that one went a little bit long, but there's just so much to talk about from that game, and it was just such a good game to talk about. So for the everyday listeners, I'm still going to release a new episode tomorrow, even though it's a bye week. I just won't be doing my normal game preview, obviously. Instead, I'm going to be doing a midseason, but not really midseason report card for all the position groups. Then later in the week, I'm going to do some deep dives on Notre Dame recruiting, considering I haven't really talked about that in a while, and it's obviously very important. The best way to stay up to date on everything we're doing here on the pod is to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Plus, you can shoot us a follow on Twitter/X at LockedOnIrish, on Instagram at LockedOnIrishPod, and my personal Twitter account, which is at Tyler, WOJCIAK. Same time, same place tomorrow. I'll see you then.